Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, friends of Japanese prints. I'm Dieter Wanschura. I am the owner and manager of the Artelino company. We sell Japanese prints in weekly online auctions. And we produce these videos about Japanese prints. Subject of today is a hot subject, promised hot. Japanese prints and value consideration. We often get emails where clients or non-clients ask us, what's the value of my print? Yeah, very, very important. Today, I'm not going to tell you what's the value of your print because this is not an online chat, this is a video, but I want to discuss with you the factors that influence the value of Japanese prints. Let me start with a wrap-up just of these factors. And I counted 7 factors. I may have forgotten something, so please don't bash me, don't pull me by the hair. A little bit difficult anyway. These 7 factors are, in my view, the artist, the subject and the style, the condition of the print, the impression, early or late, how rare a print is, how rare a design is, the technique. This is specific for Japanese prints. And last but not least, something very, very irrational, fashion. Simply fashion, trendy fashion. Let's start one by one with the artist. And in order to give you a good example, I picked out 2 artists. Both artists are from the Shinhanga art movement of the first half of the 20th century. One is very expensive, Hasui Kawase, considered to be the best landscape printmaker of the first half of the 20th century, Japanese printmaker. Yeah? And the other one is Tsuchiya Koetsu, in my view excellent, but by far less expensive than Hasui. Let's take a look. Okay, well, this is by Hasui Kawase. Wonderful, great print, beautiful. Sold in our auctions, had a reserve of $600, went out for $700 plus commission, plus shipping. And now a look at Koetsu Tsuchiya, a contemporary of Hasui Kawase. Went out for $300, had a reserve of even only $80, crazy. Okay, but Artelino has smart buyers. And well, they recognized the value and did some counterbidding, and it went out for $300 plus commission. Nevertheless, distinctively lower in value, in market price compared to Hasui. And that's typical for these 2 artists. Yeah, I'll leave it up to you to judge if this is lower in quality. In my view, it's excellent, it's very well made, it's an attractive subject. Okay, anyway, the artist, a huge difference. Next, subject and style. And I'm now going to list you just typical subjects that sell well, yeah? And at the end, I will also mention 1 or 2 that are unattractive. Popular subjects for Japanese prints, but I think this is in general and applies to all kind of art prints. Popular, beautiful women, yeah, of course. And beautiful women, an old main popular subject of old ukiyo-e. Another subject that sells well, nice landscapes. Another one, and this is typical for Japanese prints now. Japanese stereotypes. I call this Japanese Disneyland. Yeah, this is so typical for the Shinhanga art movement that shows a Japan that doesn't exist anymore, that hasn't existed at the time when they created these prints. And there are quite a few people who consider this a little bit kitschy, and it may be. Yeah, and this is an example. Yeah, sailboat, red sunset. Yeah, a little bit kitschy, but this sells well. What else sells well? Light pastel colors. Then for old Japanese prints from the Edo period, 19th century or earlier, what sells well? Warrior prints, samurai, especially in fighting scenes, yeah, samurai on horse. Well then, back to Shinhanga. Shinhanga night scenes. There are quite a few designs by a few artists. Kyohika Kobayashi, for instance, created a lot of night scenes, although these are very popular. Well then, something very specific. Prints that show cats, for instance, by Kuniyoshi. Kuniyoshi, the great Utagawa master from the first half of the 19th century, a print that shows a cat, even when it's just small, yeah, that is very much asked by collectors and is very popular. But not only cats, also prints that show fish or old ships, yeah. Not popular, black and white in general, yeah. Black and white does not attract as much as prints in colors, and I can understand it. I personally prefer color. Don't ask me why, but it's a fact. And some contemporary artists, they make this mistake. They produce only woodblock prints in black and white because it's easier, but it doesn't sell that well. You should know that. Another example that doesn't sell so well anymore are Meiji triptychs, Meiji prints with these excessive, very gaudy red and purple colors. I show you now an example. This is, I didn't take it from our archive. This is, I think, from the British Museum. It's a nice print. And you see this strong red here. The Meiji prints were produced with synthetic colors. And in the beginning, the quality was not very good. They had a tendency to bleed out. By the way, they were imported from Germany. I'm entitled to say that I'm German myself. Next point, condition. There may be a huge difference in value for the same design in excellent condition compared to one in poor condition. Of course, this applies now mainly to old prints, 100 years old, 150 or even 200 years old. Bad condition, wormholes, tears, spots, foxing. And the difference may be like 1 to 10. The same design by the same artist may have a value of $50 or $500. Clear. Next factor, impression. Collectors of Japanese woodblock prints prefer early impressions. Prints, that were pulled from the blocks at the very beginning when the blocks were not yet worn off, yeah, and this has the highest value. Later printing, value comes down. Something printed after the death of the artist, it's called posthumous prints. Lower in value, and finally, when the blocks are completely worn out, then sometimes reproductions are made. For Japanese prints, the reproductions often made by hand, by carving new blocks. It's all handmade. Nevertheless, it's a reproduction, and this has the lowest value, seldomly more than $50, $100, hardly ever more than $200. And a reproduction of a Japanese print will hardly ever hit a four-digit number. It will never become really valuable. Remember that. Well, next, how rare is a print? How rare is a print in the market? Let's assume from one design 5,000 copies were pulled. From another one, only 100 because the series didn't sell. I give you an example now. The same artist, Kunisada. Okay, well, this is a print. It was sold for $90. it's average. It's not a bad print. It's okay. It shows an unattractive subject. Yeah, a guy who abuses a servant by trying to bash her with a stick. This is not an attractive subject. So cheap. Now another example. The same artist, Kunisada Utagawa, and of course, it's not quite comparable because this is a 6-panel print, but it went out for $1,500 plus commission, so value comes close to $2,000. The same artist. So how rare a print is, and this print, you don't see it very often in the market, whereas these kabuki scenes, they are very frequent and therefore lower in value. Next factor that I mentioned before, the technique. And this is now specific for Japanese prints, for collectors of Japanese prints. Remember that. Collectors of Japanese prints prefer one technique, and this is the good old woodblock print. For modern prints made after 1945, this preference is not that strong. Nevertheless, there are still many who also prefer artists, and there are still many, the Mokuhanga artists after 1945, who use this old technique of woodblock printmaking. So woodblock printmaking has a clear preference and a very positive influence on the value of your print. Well, last but not least, fashion trends that has a lot to do with the value, and it's irrational. Well, most of these factors that influence the value of a print are not really rational, but there's something like, it's hard to explain. For our clothes, fashion changes every year. For art, well, the trends, they can change within 1 decade. And then I'll give you one example. Let's take a look at the next print. This is a wonderful print by Paul Jacolet, a French-Japanese artist who was very popular in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s still, and people who wanted to show that they could afford it, they bought Paul Jacolet prints and put them in their offices or in their living rooms, many into their offices just to show off as a status symbol. I can afford a Paul Jacolet print. And at that time, Paul Jacolet, $2,000, $3,000 was a normal price. Let's take a look at that one. I think it was in pretty good condition. It went out for $700. And usually when we have in our auctions now a Paul Jacolet print, hardly ever above $1,000. There's no rational reason for it. Yeah. Another example, Yokohama prints. Yokohama, these are prints that show foreigners there. These are prints were made at the end of the 19th century. They also used to be very expensive at, let's say, 20 years ago. And they are rare. The impressions are often not very good, but they are very, very interesting. I'll show you one example. Yeah, it's from our archive of sold prints. When towards the late 19th century, foreigners came to Japan, they were a subject of curiosity for Japanese people because Japan had been a sealed off, a completely closed country for 300 years, and then came these foreigners, and there was a curiosity, yeah? And the artists showed these foreigners, showed their ships, showed them on horse and their strange habits and their beards. That was all unknown. And you don't find them often in the market. I personally like them very much from a historical aspect, very interesting. But today, the prices are down compared to 20 years ago. Yeah. Well, let's come to my conclusion. Many of these factors that influence the value of your print, or at least some, they are not rational, they are irrational, they are subject just to fashion, to trends. And by acting against the flow in the market, you can build up a wonderful collection. Don't be influenced by these fashion trends, yeah? They may change, it may be different in 5 years from now. And then Jacques Collet may have record prices again and everybody is craving for Yokohama prints. It could happen. So buy what you like, use your own taste, use your brains, and do not necessarily follow strictly what the market currently does. Okay, well, so much today about value considerations. And of course, you can buy always for a good price in our auctions. And you can view our videos about Japanese prints. These are for free. Wonderful, great. And I would be pleased to see you for our next video. Thanks and goodbye for watching.